Hi, my name is Sheena Estep, and I'm going to be giving a presentation over the traumatic narrative in young adult literature. Let me get this pulled up and we'll get started. All right. The title of this presentation is The Young Adult Traumatic Narrative Empowering Young Victims. An overview of this presentation is that it will show evidence to support how educators can use the traumatic narrative in their classroom. They can teach valuable coping skills, such as like identifying with your trauma and skills to get past it. It could also teach young adults empathy for someone that is going through something traumatic. Um, it can teach them how to be a stronger support system if they're recognizing that someone has the red flags of trauma in their life. This presentation will also be a rebuttal for the future banning of traumatic narratives from the classroom. Unfortunately, the traumatic narrative is often makes the top of the list for books being banned in the classroom. And oftentimes, the legislators that are banning these books, they're only um, familiar with the content of the novel and not so much how the novel approaches the content. For example, in one of the books I'm going to be talking about, Speak, um, there's no graphic scenes. The trauma occurs before the book starts, and it's just kind of her dealing with it and overcoming it. The second one is a little bit more explicit. It would be more for older students, but um, that's like I said, they're not always familiar with what exactly is going on in the book. And there will also offer support for highlighting the use of positive traumatic representation, so they can relate to their transformations, um, from the characters that are dealing with similar situations. Like I said, the trauma is not positive, but there are positive ways to um, get past it and cope with it. Um, this presentation highlights two young adult traumatic narratives. The first one is Speak. It was written in 1999 by Laurie Haas Anderson. Um, this book highlights a teen who's regaining her identity after suffering trauma. She's raped before in the summer before her she goes into high school, and she stops talking as a result. And the and it just highlights her struggle, and then she does transform and she's able to regain her identity. So it ends on a positive note, and it does highlight several coping skills. The other book is 13 Reasons Why. It was published in 2007 by Jay Asher, and it shows the effects of teen suicide on both the victim and all of the people in their lives. So I'll talk a little bit more about the layout of that book and how it's able to do that. These are the covers for both of the novels. Like I said, Speak. Um, the protagonist character is raped in the summer, and she comes back and she refuses to speak to anybody. But what's unique about this book is it offers an internal monologue that is different from what she's actually saying to people in her life, even though she's speaking very little. The internal monologue is very sarcastic, and it really gives insight into what she's dealing with. She becomes very depressed, but it's the internal monologue that would be very relatable to characters, to students, excuse me, who identify with these characters. 13 Reasons Why, like I said, there are a couple of scenes that are a little more graphic. So, as with always, you would need to warn your students about upcoming graphic content and be aware of your district's policy with that. Um, because if someone had gone through something that's in these books, you don't want to re-traumatize them, and you want to be very delicate with the subject matter. But what's unique about this book is, it's about the victim had committed suicide, and she recorded tapes before her death, and she explains all the small things that led to her suicide. And then there was a big point where she was sexually assaulted as well, and she was having trouble dealing with that, and then just the small things really snowballed and accumulated, and she wasn't able to deal with it anymore. And she gives the tapes that she recorded before her suicide to character Clay Jensen, and he's kind of the voice of reason in all of it because she was very depressed, and she's kind of an unreliable narrator, and he's able to give more insight, and she blamed several people, and his point of view was, well, they wouldn't have done this to her if they knew she was dealing with something big. But the crazy part about this book, or not crazy but very unique, is that it highlights several different characters, and some of the characters that had done something to Hannah Baker before her suicide are also going through things in their life. They're also encountering their own trauma. Some of them are dealing with alcoholism, drug addictions, abuse in their own lives. So this offers many opportunities to be relatable to students of all different walks of life. The methodology for answering the research questions was done by using both the novel themselves with quotations and supporting text, and qualitative sources offering support from literary critics, educators, scholars, um, a lot of scholarly journals and research in that regard. I did use some quantitative. I used some statistics about Oklahoma youth and the suicide rates in Oklahoma youth, and some numbers and statistics as far as that research. The targeted discourse community for the research project is English education majors. This is showing you how you could use these traumatic narratives in your classroom, and current English teachers as well. Um, like I said, the specific literary elements in Speak were the internal monologue that I talked briefly about. One second. I skipped forward. Okay. Like I said, the internal monologue, it talks about her thoughts even when she's not speaking out loud to people. She has a sense of humor, and she's very sarcastic, and she really voices her internal thoughts and fears because she has that her thoughts are on display, and so it's very relatable to a wide range of students. The readers are also compelled to pay attention because the eccentric form of narrative, there are lists, there's bulletin points, and like when she walks through the high school, if she doesn't know people's names, like she calls one teacher hair lady because her hair's crazy and over her face, and so that's pretty common for young students in high school as a script style dialogue, and it will have their names by colons and headings, and it's just the layout is very unique and eccentric, but it does make you want to continue reading and pay attention. Um, in Jay Asher's book, like I said, it uses audio tapes. They're posthumous. She's already died, and it offers insight as to why she took her own life. And like I said before, it's the perspective of several different characters, all going through some kind of traumatic experiences in their life. Um, and it shows how, they pushed her to her suicide, but they were unknowing, and they were going through things as well. So, um, it also shows how Miss Trent, a teacher for a 10th grade classroom, uses this curriculum and teaches the snowball effect. And she was very successful in especially a discussion with bullying and how it's so prominent now, and what effects that can have on a person. I chose this graph to show that the suicide rates are going down, but it's the young adults and the young kiddos that are still keeping the numbers as high as they are. Um, one of the one of the statistics I found kind of jarring was that Oklahoma specifically is second in the nation for students that have traumas in their life. They say Oklahoma is famous for passing down trauma from generation to generation, and they're not like um, moving out of that cycle. Unfortunately, we have a lot of kiddos living in poverty, and so especially for us Oklahoma educators, it's going to be very important to realize the trauma and not only be a mandated reporter, but to give them these coping skills and empathy to deal with it after it's happened. Um, One of the big things in Speak by Lori Haas Anderson is that one of the coping skills that Melinda finds is that she goes to art class and she meets Mr. Freeman, and he becomes a trusted adult in her life, and he also gives her art as an outlet, and he's encouraging her, and it's him that she eventually trusts enough to tell about what happened to her. And just some of the quotes throughout the book were really powerful. He said to her, he says, "You're a good kid. I think you have a lot to say. I'd like to hear it." People hadn't been saying that to her. She starts drawing trees, and the trees were very symbolic in her transformation. At first, she's drawing them dead and sad, and then she starts to draw them. He's telling her to breathe life into them, and she starts to draw them. The trees are transforming kind of as she is. And he doesn't force her to talk, but he offers her safe place in the art classroom, and he just encourages her to find that outlet and lets her know that she could talk to him when she's ready. And then there's a line in the book that kind of like that breakthrough moment, and she said, "The tears dissolve, the last block of ice in my throat. I feel the frozen stillness melt down through the inside of me, dripping shards of ice that vanish in a puddle of sunlight on the stained floor, and words float up." So that moment when the words float up is the moment that she decided to talk about her trauma and tell Mr. Freeman what has happened to her. And that could be important for students because they need to know that they can talk to teachers and that, school's a safe place for them. Um, in 13 Reasons Why, Clay Jansen also had a transformation. Like I said, Hannah Baker, she committed suicide, and it shows kind of the effect that that had on everybody around her. But it's the character of Clay Jensen that transforms. He learns about her stories and how these things that accumulated that made her feel like she had no other option. Um, and then in the end, his transformation becomes clear because he runs into a girl that he had a crush on in middle school. And he recognizes that she is also depressed and at risk for suicide. And there's a moment where he says, her Sky's footsteps are growing louder now, and the closer I get to her, the faster I walk and the lighter I feel, and my throat begins to relax. Now that quote was just like a key moment because he was unsure how to deal with things like noticing red flags for someone that's suicidal and everything. But because of what he had gone through with Hannah's, he had started to recognize those red flags, and he says his throat begins to relax because he feels like he can be a little bit of a help and a support system for her. It's also a transformation that's similar to Melinda because Melinda found her words, but um, Clay also found his way to cope with something that, even though it wasn't his direct trauma, he was very impacted by it, and so he kind of learned how to deal with that and transformed as well. Um, in conclusion, is imperative um, that we provide students um, the coping mechanisms and ways to live their life to the best of their ability. We need to teach them these things because, like I said, especially in Oklahoma, a lot of these kiddos are seeing a lot more than they should, and we could provide them with coping mechanisms and empathy. Um, if a student has experienced depression, and these books also tackle several forms of trauma, not just the sexual assault, but uh, mental abuse, physical abuse, drug and alcohol addictions, there's blackmail, and there's even kiddos that are struggling with like being bullied because of homosexuality. So there are several things that um, offer like students a chance to relate with trauma in these novels. And the most important part is they highlight daily acts of resilience and resistance that can be there even if a student's unable to talk about their trauma. So just like in Speak, her finding art as an outlet and finally talking to a teacher, and in 13 Reasons Why, just Clay transforming and learning how to deal with someone that they love being depressed and what he could have done in hindsight, even though Hannah's personal trauma ended so sadly, it showed like future strategies and coping mechanisms. This is a list of my works cited. Like I said, I used several scholarly journals and the actual text themselves with quotations as well. And I want to thank you for watching my presentation and listening along. Thank you.